Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the symposium. IT plays a crucial role in modern business, enabling efficiency and enhancing innovation, contributing to the overall profitability of an organization. But does the business understand the value of IT and its contribution? Here's what we know. CIOs and technology leaders struggle to communicate the value of IT to the business. Judging by the size of this room, this is a common problem. We all face this. But why? Why do we struggle? What is the challenge? What is the issue? I have a background in corporate finance, and I work with CIOs and CFOs and CEOs. And I've been in the room where there's conversations about value. And I've seen the messaging not hitting the point. The dart is not hitting the board. Today we will discuss why is the messaging not landing, and from the perspective of our consumers, our stakeholders. And maybe I can help you get some darts on the board. So perhaps we are asking the wrong question. The question shouldn't be, how do I communicate the value of IT to the business? But rather, the right question might be, how are business outcomes and executive priorities impacted by digital technology? Stop asking the question, how do I tell people what I do? And instead, get them interested in the value that you create by asking, how is what am I doing having a material impact on the objectives of the organization, the goals of the executives, or the desired outcome we're trying to achieve as an organization? And hopefully through this presentation, I can help you see some of these differences. So IT demonstrates value when we enable business outcomes, not when we report effort expended, work consumed, or work done. That's an important distinction to remember. Your value is not in what you do. Your value is what you achieve and the outcomes that you drive for the organization. And more specifically, the outcomes you drive that have a material impact on the mission of the organization and the goals of your objectives. So let's take this idea of how business outcomes and executive priorities are impacted by digital technology. Let's break this question down into its three key components. Firstly, the business outcomes or executive priorities, which are the audience and objective questions. Second is the impact. What is the impact? How do we create the impact? How do we do something that is measurable and meaningful? And then third, what are the digital information and technology deliverables? How do we, in our IT role, within our unique domain, what we own and what we control, and what we don't own and what we don't control, deliver outcomes that have a specific value to the business? Let's take a look at first what we're doing right. There's definitely engagement. We are engaging our stakeholders. Our IT score reveals that IT leaders are engaging the business in the value conversation. 93% of the mature organizations believe they engage the business, and that's the top 20% of the 1860 that we surveyed. So they are engaging the business stakeholders. Even the less mature, the 51%, believe that they are engaging the business. But when we take the next step and we ask the question, are we capturing the value? Are we building a business case? Are we justifying the expense based on specific value and risk? The numbers are noticeably lower. The mature drops to 73%, and the less mature are only doing it 27% of the time, linking your investments to business goals. They need to be done in conjunction with each other. Now, that leaves a lot of room for improvement. That's an area where we need to work in communicating value in a much more effective way for our stakeholders to enable us in technology to drive the growth and transformation initiatives. Now, let's dive into the conversation a little bit. Let's talk about objectives, the audience objectives, the who and the what elements, because this is the first and the most fundamental component that we need to keep in mind as we build that value narrative for our stakeholders and for our business. IT professionals do not own the value proposition. The business audience, our stakeholders, the people who consume what we ultimately do, determine the value. Remember, value is determined by the consumer, not by the provider. When a person is willing to transact around something, that is very clear and demonstrable value. When you hand over your cash to somebody, you want to buy the services. So put yourself in a consumer situation. Think about your own life, your own buyer tendencies. You have your own concept of what you value, what we need in your transaction. And if there's a solution that solves the problem, you pay for it, you buy it. So let's think about what matters to our business leaders. Start by asking two things. What do they care about? And how can you make what they care about better? If we understand what's important, we need to understand how we make it better. Then we've set the path for a much more impactful value message. We start to understand our audience. We start to influence the audience. So think about it this way. From a technology perspective, inputs and resources and architecture and delivery do not deliver value. The outcomes impacted is when we deliver value. So IT delivers value when we positively impact business outcomes. We need to define those business outcomes. We need to work with our stakeholders. But the value is only delivered when those outcomes are achieved. So, and value is measured by tracking those demonstrable impact to our stakeholders to achieve their mission-critical priorities. So stop worrying about the what and the how, and you have to focus on the why. What is it that we are doing, and why is it important? Why does it matter? Why will an executive care about it? So ask the question, why is it strategically important to the goals of the enterprise? What business outcomes is it impacting? And how will it drive the mission-critical objectives of the organization, like revenue maximization, cost optimization, or mitigating risk? So you have to make sure you give the why. I have a 10-year-old son, and like most parents, I struggle to convince him to brush his teeth at night. I have to convince him why. So you have teeth so you can have more candy the next day. Of course, there are other reasons as well why you need teeth. But you need to make sure you understand the language of your audience, and you communicate the why. You have to give them the whiffing, what's in it for them. If you find yourself diving into conversations of platforms and applications or devices and technologies, you're falling out of the why conversation. You're quickly losing the value narrative. You're forgetting who the audience is or what their challenges are, what their needs are. You have to focus on outcomes impacted. I've been in a room where I've seen the CIO and technology leaders tell CFOs, we upgraded that system, we did that to the data center, and I can see the CFO switch off. Maybe they don't understand the technical jargon, or maybe don't see the value, right? So what is the value? So you need to have that language and that conversation with your stakeholders. Focus on outcomes impacted. Talk about sales enabled, transactions processed, bills processed, automating a system which finds efficiency in the business. So you need to find the why and impact on the outcomes. Let's move to the second point, which is actions and measures, the what and the how much. So in the context of actions, firstly, think about a change conversation, which is separate from the run conversation. Run is keeping the lights on. It's needed. We need the run. We need to be able to run the business. But the change conversation is the easier conversation. Why? Because you can attach it to value. You can attach it to revenue, to return on investment. You can change its new value. It's chasing new dollars. Unlike run, which is already part of your baseline. But the run is also important because it helps you keep your lights on. But you have to make sure you don't lose the value narrative of your run, which is roughly 70% or 80% of your cost base, depending on which industry you're in. In Gartner's IT budget benchmarking, we talk about the run, grow, and transform distinction. Leverage those key metrics to support your methodology. I speak to a lot of clients about IT budgets and how you can leverage those metrics to have a value-based conversation with your stakeholders. Leverage the run, grow, transform decision trees to make that assessment as you have that value conversation. The second step we need to take is we need to figure out how to tell the story. I'll walk us through a 5-step mapping exercise. The first is understand your audience. Who is your audience? We kind of talked about audience in the first section of the presentation. The second is determine what do they care about. In the case of my 10-year-old son, candy. The third is, how do you impact what your audience cares about? How do you convince them? How do you get your message across? Once you've done those first three things, you're in a much better position to measure the impact and finally to be able to cost that impact. You need to make sure there's a rationale and there's a balance between the value of the impact and the cost of the impact. So as we think about this mapping exercise, we're going to build it out a little bit. And I'll talk you through how to do this. So in phase one, our goal is to identify our executives. I suggest start with people as high up that org chart as you possibly can. Your CEO, your CFO, your operations. Ask the question, what is it that they care about? And literally take a chart like this and fill it in. Take a blank piece of paper and fill it in. Identify the things that your executives care about. Now, in most organizations, especially for profit organizations, this is a pretty obvious set of things. Executives are in their role to drive revenue and growth, to decrease costs so that your profitability goes up, and to mitigate risks that are going to have a negative impact on our organization or our profitability, or our ability to service clients, or our ability to keep our employees satisfied and risk-free and making sure they have access to systems. Nonprofits might have a different value impact component that's slightly different, things like citizen safety, railroads, infrastructure. But still, it's about delivering the goals and objectives for which our organization functions. Once you've validated the audience objectives, you need to identify the areas that have the greatest material impact on those goals and objectives. So think about them differently. Think about the activities of revenue, the functions of cost reduction, risk mitigation to keep the company running. Think about the things that are most important and prioritize your list from top to bottom. Think about systems of transactions, systems of delivery, systems of client interaction, things that have a material impact on your ability to do business. And as you think about costs, major cost reduction activities, things that will have relevance to your audience, that they will understand, they will resonate with. And when you're building that narrative, think about the risks that are most relevant to your audience. You obviously need to cover all risks, but when you're having that conversation with senior stakeholders, think of the relevant risks that impact the organization's ability to generate profits or to service its clients. Now, as you do this, force yourself to rank them from top to bottom. There's no point in having 50 things on that slide. Think about the top 3 to 5 areas where you can influence, and you can talk about the way that you have impact on those things. Now that we've identified the value impacting deliverables, we're ready to set up this idea of actions and measures. These are the actions that we are taking. How do we measure them? We're going to measure the critical business outcomes. If you pick any of these revenue activities as an example, in an order entry system or a transaction system, what we want to measure is the typical questions executives asked. How well are we doing it? How many are we producing? Can we do more? Is it making money? Is it growing the organization, or this is just an organic growth? What is the cost per item that we're producing, and what is the capacity to do more if we're doing that well? So it's important to make sure you separate the revenue and the value story to your cost efficiency and to your risk story. And lastly, once you've measured the impact, you're now in the ability to measure the cost of these outcomes. So what is the cost per transaction? How efficiently are you producing that transaction? What could we do to improve the efficiency or to reduce the cost of that work? Remember, the value is in the outcome, not in the parts. I'll use a car analogy here. I tell people we need to measure the value of the outcomes and not the parts. So here's the challenge. Don't get lost in the conversations about the parts of the engine. The engine size, the way it was built, isn't important. Does it do what it's needed to do? Does it take me from point A to point B? Does it offer me the driving experience? Is it safe? Is it reliable? If you find yourselves talking about the parts of the car, you're probably talking about an operational conversation, not a business value conversation. So you need to elevate yourself from the operational conversation to the business value conversation. And you can choose any car for that example. So think about, what are your units of consumption? What are your parts in this story? How do you communicate that value back to the organization? Instead of talking about the parts, are you talking about the objective, which is the driving experience of taking you from point A to point B? As we measure impact on what the business value, think about measuring the impact and the value of it. Look at your consumers and see, how do they ask the question? How do they interact with technology? What is the experience with technology? What do they call that experience? You're looking for the language of your clients. And you're looking to understand, how do they view and consume technology? Take a Workday employee experience as an example. We all use some sort of HR tools, Workday most commonly. As an employee, does it offer me, can I look at my payroll? Can I look at my payslip? Can I look at my performance benchmarks? Can I look at my goals? Can I look at my objectives? Do I have the right skills to be able to do my job? Can I look at my organization structure? Make those systems available to your employees and give them the experience that they deserve. That's what makes business value. As you're having conversations about measuring value, we need to elevate your business value story and make it relevant to our stakeholders. Talk about things that they care about. People tend to switch off if the conversation has no relevance or meaning to their objectives. Language of value needs to be clear. Don't get caught in technical jargon. Think about a flying experience. I'm sure most of you have taken a flight to get here. So you know when you're about to land, and just before you're about to land, the pilot opens up the speaker. You can hardly understand what they're saying. They're talking about the altitude, how many birds in the sky, what is the weather like, what is the air traffic controller telling us. But as a passenger, do you care about all this? Do you understand all that technical jargon, all those buttons that pilot's playing with? As a passenger, all you care about is, when am I going to land? That's it. Just tell me, what is it that's going to take to get us to land? So try to remove yourself from the technical jargon as you're having those conversations. And make sure it's believable. The language of value has to be believable. Talk about things that you own and control. Make sure that when you're talking about your value and your outcome, your stakeholders believe your claims. And if we do those things well, we'll have more impact and we'll be able to have a greater value story with our audience. Now, let's talk about the last section, which is domain and delivery. That is how and by whom. So one of the things we must realize is technology has a material impact to everything in the business. Almost every company is now becoming a technology company. But not all that technology is for us to own and control. We need to be able to identify those things that we own, those things that we can control, and things where we can add value. And then the goal is to identify and build against the ones that have the greatest value and the most impact, because like most cases, our resources are limited. So the question is, where can we have the greatest impact? Take an example of IT and finance. This is something I've done in my professional life before Gartner, where IT and finance have worked together to improve the financial systems. Now, IT may not own all the financial technology stack, but they have the technical expertise to be able to add value through data and analytics, through RPA, through technologies, through dashboards, through using Power BI, or whatever technology you have in your organization, and giving your stakeholders the experience that they deserve. So it doesn't matter if you own those technologies, you can always contribute to your business performance. As you look to extend your domain and your ownership versus the outcomes, I tell people, think about your impact in two ways. You must own the delivery. We must do what we do really well. We have to become experts. We have to build the confidence and build our reputation in our ability to deliver positive results. And as we do that, as we build trust as an enabler, we can step across the line and say to the business, we fix the problem with automation. We build the trust. We become a strategic partner to the business. And you will see the business will give you more opportunities. And you start to expand your domain and your influence as you positively impact those business outcomes. The second step of that is to think about what we do right and how do you make it better. I suggest there are two ways to think about it. First, make technology easy to use. Make it more understandable, easier to consume. QR codes, one of the most easiest pieces of technologies to use in the last 3-4 years. Imagine your experience when you go to a restaurant. You can just order your food online. You don't have to wait for the staff. Easier dining experience, faster checkouts, easier to consume. and easier to implement. Secondly, how do you apply technologies to improve in business outcomes? Find the ones that make most sense for the organization and provide the greatest value to the business. Take a billing platform for an organization in retail, which is fast producing sales transactions. That makes a difference to the objectives. So find a piece of technology that you have the greatest impact and the technical capability and expertise to influence. Let's take an example of a lending agency where processing loans to drive the business profitability is the key goal. What is the business outcome-driven metric here? It's the number of days to close a loan. So how do we impact this at a technology level? The number of transactions that we are able to support, the number of loans we are able to process. The point here is that as a business outcome, we're trying to drive, and there's a technology impact that will help in that cause. But you need to move from below the line, from the operational conversation to above the line, which is the most business outcomes and decision-making capabilities. Let's take look at another example. This is a local government example where community health is a business outcome. So the business metric is the number of days to see a doctor. The technical contribution we can make is keeping the systems of scheduling up and running, or increasing the capacity so we can manage our transactions or requests for a doctor's appointment. One, again, is simply that there's a business level objective driven by technology-based outcomes. But remember, you need to move away from below the line, talking about operational capability, to above the line, where you can partner with the business and drive those outcomes, and talk about the decisions. As you think about your next actions, as you take away from the symposium, there's one thing I'd like you to think about is how can you make technology easier to use? Think about the business impacts. What can you do to improve that experience? By partnering with your business, your functions, be it business functions or corporate functions, leveraging your outsourcing provider for the skill sets that they have, not just from a cost perspective, but from your transformation goals. And how do you create the business impact? How do you create workflow or tasks? How do you improve processes or apply automation? Think about all the impacts you can have across the business. And these are the things that will elevate your role, they will elevate your work and your stakeholder experience, and ultimately help you tell a better business value narrative to your stakeholders. Your executives will understand that you have an impact on the mission of the organization. It's not just the technology. It's not just standing up servers. We've got to make technology easier, more valuable, and more valuable from a stakeholder perspective. Remember, they are the ones who decide the value. And by doing this, we start to get some dots on the board. I've shared a list of readings and resources to help you create your value story. We have recently launched the Initiative Accelerator at Gartner that includes value story examples, dashboard templates. I can see some of the clients I've talked to about this in my experience here. As a Gartner analyst, I can also review your drafts. I can help you create that value story. I have the professional experience and access to Gartner resources to help you craft that value story. Please schedule a one-on-one call, and I'll be happy to help you in that journey. Thank you for your time and your attention and your interest. I hope you enjoyed the session today, and I hope you found it of value. Thank you very much, and have a great day.